Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading to the high seas for a collection of disturbing tales that happened in or around deep water. So it's time to get comfortable, grab your life jacket, and let the darkness take control. Working on cruise ships, you hear all kinds of wild stories. Old sea legends, drunken crew tales, and occasionally, stories about other stuff. Dark stuff. Most of it's just harmless chatter passed around the mess halls and smoke decks. But every now and then something sticks. About 4 years ago I was working a South American season, Rio, Buenos Aires, Valparaiso. I spent most of my off hours hanging out with the Brazilian crew. Good people, loud, funny, and always up for a laugh. The gift shop manager was especially outspoken. He'd always be complaining mostly about how lazy his team was, how they fake being sick or skip shifts for the dumbest reasons. But his favorite rant? That his staff kept saying they saw a little girl running around the gift shop, always late at night and always when no passengers were around. He'd laugh it off, say they were just trying to get out of work. "They're scared of a damn ghost child now?" he said once, rolling his eyes. Ridículo. One night a group of us, him, me, and the head of photography, were sitting in the back of the staff cafe drinking a cheap machine coffee. It was just after midnight. The ship was gently rocking as we cut through the dark water. The gift shop manager was especially wound up, fuming about how he was going to have to cover for two of his team again. "Lazy cowards," he kept saying, making up ghost stories like children. A few hours later, my cabin rings. It's the photo manager, and she sounds rattled. "Can I come to your room?" she asks. "Now?" "He's here, and something happened." I thought maybe someone had gotten bad news from home, perhaps a death in the family, so I rushed over. But when I stepped into her cabin, I found him there, the same bolsterous, tough-as-nail guy huddled on the edge of her bed, shoulders shaking, his face pale as a sheet. He was crying. After a few minutes, he told me what happened. He'd been working alone in the small back office tucked just behind the clothing section of the gift shop. His room itself faced a long mirror that ran almost the full length of the outer wall. He said it started with a soft giggling sound. At first, he thought maybe someone's kid had gotten into the shop, but it was past midnight, and the entire deck was closed and sealed off. The only people who would be around were crew sneaking food or guests gambling in the casino. He looked up, and that's when he saw her in the mirror. A tiny shadow barely the height of the counter peeking around the edge of the open office door, only visible in the reflection, like she was leaning around to watch him, half curious, half playing a game. He turned around, but there was nothing. But in the mirror she was still there. He said his blood turned to ice, and every hair on his body stood on end. At first he couldn't move, he just locked eyes with her in the glass. Then she laughed and vanished out of sight. He bolted and ran full speed out of the shop, all the way to the crew's stairwell, and didn't stop until he found the photo manager and begged her to let him stay in her room. He swore he'd seen something that didn't belong on this ship anymore. I didn't know what to say. He wasn't the type of person to make things up, and I'd never seen him like that, cracked open, terrified and broken. The next day, I brought it up to my boss, half joking and half expecting her to roll her eyes. But to my surprise, she didn't laugh. She just looked at me, her face suddenly serious, and said, "You don't know the story." Apparently, 2 decades ago a little girl had been on board with her parents. They'd just finished a family show in the theatre and were heading back to their room. The girl was running ahead, excited and laughing like kids do, when she slipped away near the gift shop too fast for her parents to catch. She ran through the shop, into the casino and then towards the atrium. The atrium is a massive open space within the center of the ship, lined with glass elevators, and it stretches from deck 12 all the way to deck 5, a long, vertical drop surrounded by shiny chrome rails and hanging lights. The little girl leaned over the railing. a bit too far, and fell. They say her neck snapped instantly when she hit the marble floor below, and apparently she never left. Crew over the years have said the same thing. They hear giggles, see shadows, items are moved, that they catch fleeting glimpses of a little girl just out of sight. Some even claimed they'd seen the elevators move on their own in the middle of the night, always stopping at deck 7, right where she took her last steps while being alive. I still don't know what to make of it. I'm not a superstitious person, and I've worked dozens of ships and heard many ghost stories. But after seeing him that night, I believed him, and I believe she's still there. This is a memory I buried so deep I almost convinced myself it never happened. It only surfaced again recently, when my siblings and I were reminiscing about our dad, how absent-minded and scatterbrained he could be, sometimes in ways that made us laugh until we cried. But when someone brought up how he once left my brother at the gas station for 40 minutes, something cracked open with me. I remember the beach, the boy, the water. I was about 4 years old when this happened. I'd taken a bad fall on the playground and split the back of my head open, which needed stitches, my first real injury. I screamed like a banshee getting them in, but weeks later when it came time to take them out, I sat stoically still for the doctor, determined to be brave. My dad was so proud he rewarded me with ice cream and a spontaneous trip to the beach. It was a small, mostly forgotten town in the Australian coast in the middle of summer. The beach should have been bustling, but it was strangely quiet, just a few kids splashing around in the shallows, hardly any parents and no lifeguard. My dad walked me to the shoreline and gave me a serious look. "No deeper than your knees, not till I get back." He then turned and walked off, probably to use the toilet or take a phone call. He wasn't a bad dad, but just distracted. He loved us, but he didn't always think. I stayed where he told me, kicking at the waves. That's when a boy, of around 11, broke away from the group of kids further down and began drifting closer. He had blonde hair that stuck to his forehead in wet strands, and a weird grin. As he came closer, he said hi and asked my name and how old I was. I remember feeling flattered. A big kid talking to me? I wanted him to think I was cool, so I told him everything. How brave I'd been at the doctor's, how I got a sticker, and how I barely cried. He laughed. That's when he asked me why I wasn't swimming properly. I explained my dad said no deeper than my knees until he got back, as, truthfully, I wasn't a strong swimmer yet. He leaned forward. "It's okay, I'll teach you. It doesn't count if someone's helping." I hesitated. "What's wrong, you scared? I thought you were brave." I don't remember deciding to follow him. One minute I was standing where the water lapped at my knees, and the next I was further out, feet losing contact with the sandy bottom. The other kids had turned away, and then he grabbed me. There was no warning, no playfulness. He dunked me fast and hard beneath the surface and held me there. I thrashed and kicked. My arms flailed. I was so small and his grip was so strong. He just kept me under. Salt water filled my nose and mouth. I couldn't scream and I couldn't breathe. My chest burnt. I remember the sun flashing through the surface above me like shattered glass. I fought for as long as I could until he let go. Suddenly I was being hauled up out the water, coughing, choking and screaming. My dad's arms clutched me against his chest, water pouring off both of us. His face was twisted in this terrible mix of confusion, fury and terror. He held me like he didn't know how to let go, patting my back while I coughed up more and more water and wailed onto his shoulder. By the time I could speak, the boy had gone. The beach was nearly empty. The other kids had scattered. My dad wrapped me around in his shirt and sat with me until I stopped shaking. Then once I was calm enough to sit upright, he started driving around. For hours, we searched. I don't think he would have hesitated to take that boy's life had we found him. I never told my mum. I don't think he did either. It became one of those traumas that everyone agrees never to bring up. But it's never really gone. I still think about it sometimes, what might have happened if Dad hadn't have come back when he did, and if the boy didn't let go, and if the beach had been just a bit more empty. Because I now know exactly what he was doing. He lured me out deliberately, away from the shallows and away from witnesses. A 4-year-old alone with no adults around would have looked like a tragic drowning. Drowning a child is the perfect crime. And that sick, twisted, and demented boy knew it. This terrifying account comes from the journals of Robert Dale Owens, who swore truth by it, and it's one of the eeriest sea legends ever recorded. In 1828, Robert Bruce, a rugged first mate from Torbay, England, was aboard a merchant ship heading west across the Atlantic. The crew had been at sea for nearly 6 weeks, and the air had grown sharp and cold as they approached the icy waters near Newfoundland. At noon one bleak day, Bruce and the captain took their sun measurements and descended into the cramped, breaking belly of the ship to calculate their position. The captain vanished into his cabin, while Bruce hunched over a desk in his tiny stateroom, focused on his logroom. Frustrated by a miscalculation, Bruce called out, "I've got our longitude and latitude. Does this match yours?" He called out again but received no answer. Turning his head slightly, Bruce saw who he assumed to be the captain sitting at the main desk in the adjacent cabin. But as he glanced, his breath caught in his throat. The man wasn't the captain. He wasn't anyone Bruce had ever seen. The stranger sat perfectly still in the captain's chair, calmly scribbling on a slate with his head slightly tilted down. Then, without a word, he slowly raised his eyes and stared directly into Bruce's. His expression was blank. Bruce felt a chill seize his entire body, and he backed away in a panic as he bolted up the stairs, slamming into daylight. The crew turned to stare as he emerged, pale and shaken, and the captain rushed over and asked what happened. "There's someone down there in your chair, a man I've never seen." "Bruce, that's impossible." But determined to prove it, they stormed back into the cabin together, which was empty, and every door remained locked, and after a complete search there was no trace of the person. Then Bruce spotted the slate on the desk, and clearly written in chilling block letters were the following words: "Steer to the northwest." The captain demanded every crew write a phase for comparison, but none matched the eerie, unnatural handwriting. Uneasy but unable to explain it, the captain ordered a course and changed towards the northwest. Hours later, the lookout screamed iceberg and a ship. They spotted a frozen, shattered wreck lodged in the ice. It was a Quebec ship bound for Liverpool, trapped for weeks. Her passengers were half dead, starving, frozen, and hopeless. As the rescue began, Bruce froze midship. One of the survivors climbing aboard was him, the man from the captain's chair. The same face, the same stare, and Bruce felt the blood drain from his body. Later, the captain handed the man the slate. "Write something for me, anything. How about steer to the northwest?" The man complied, smiling nervously. Then the captain turned the slate over. "Did you write this too?" The man stared at the ghostly message. "That's not mine, I only wrote on one side." "You sure?" "Yeah, what the hell is this?" Bruce stepped forward, voice shaking. "I saw you hours ago on the ship, sitting right there, writing that exact thing." The man turned white. He admitted he had fallen into a dreamlike sleep aboard the ice-locked ship, around the time that Bruce had seen the apparition. In his dream, he'd been on another ship. This one, he even described its layout perfectly before ever setting foot on it. The man had woken suddenly and told the others that help was coming. They thought he was delirious. But the writing on the slate, the course correction, had saved them all. No one ever figured out how the stranger's face appeared to be Bruce, or how the message ended upon the slate. Neither Bruce nor the man ever fully recovered from what they experienced, and to this day sailors will sometimes share the story of what happened. My dad and stepmom were screaming at each other so loud it could have shaken the walls. Their arguments were exhausting and way too frequent. So that weekend, my dad packed my older sister and me into his truck and drove us a few hours south to my uncle's house. On our last day there, my dad took us to a decommissioned Navy battleship, now a rusting tourist attraction. I'd never been on a ship before, and I remember being fascinated. The steel corridors, the claustrophobic sleeping quarters, the greasy smell of old machinery. It felt like a haunted house built for war. Somewhere along the way, this man appeared. He was just there suddenly, standing near the entrance to one of the long corridors. Older, scruffy and unshaven, wearing saggy khaki shorts and a stained white shirt. He started talking to my dad. My dad, always polite, always sociable, humoured him. He didn't seem threatening at first. The man kept popping up though. Every deck we explored, every twist in the hallway, every exhibit, we turned the corner and he'd be nearby watching us. We made it to the top deck, the control tower, where the breeze finally cut through the humidity, and my dad and sister were admiring the view, leaning against the railing outside. I wandered into the control room alone, drawn to the massive glass window and dusty levers. As I stood there for a moment, imagining what it would be like to command a ship like this. I was looking out at the sea when I felt it, the air behind me change, and I turned and there he was, the man standing in the middle of the room, not more than 5 feet away. His shorts were pulled down in the front, his genitals exposed. His face was calm as he watched me. I froze. The fear hit so hard, like a brick to the face. My legs eventually remembered how to move and I ran, sprinting out of the door and across the deck to my dad, but the man didn't follow. He drifted behind us like a shadow, and as we left the tower and descended the metal staircase towards the submarines, he stayed close enough to make my skin crawl. I couldn't find a moment to tell my dad not what he was watching. It wasn't until we passed the gift shop nearing the exit gates that 2 security guards stopped him. They didn't wrestle him or shout. They just calmly stepped into his path like they'd done it before. I finally told my dad what happened and what I saw, and his face changed, his jaw clenched like stone, and for a second I thought he was going to turn back and kill the man. Instead, he stormed over to the nearest staff member, a young woman in a polo shirt, and told her what happened. Her response? A sigh. "We've had other complaints. Same guy. Cops are on their way." It was just another day for her. Like a predator, stalking was the most normal thing in the world. We never set foot on that ship again. We still drive past it sometimes on the way to my uncle's. It looms in the harbour, frozen in time. And every time I see it, I wonder how long the man had been following me for before I noticed. Have you ever been in a place where you know you're alone, but still get the feeling of being watched? That there's something almost tangible lingering just beyond your senses, the light brush of something across your skin, but when you turn to look, nothing's there, or the feeling that you're not welcome in a place. My story begins many years ago, on a lonely, unmanned oil platform out in the middle of the sea. Let's set the stage. We were part of a crew of 20 men from different companies performing different services, contracted by a client to perform some well intervention work on an old offshore oil platform. We were divided in the day and night shift, 10 men each, and would be working around the clock. Oftentimes, some of us would be on standby while others got some part of the job done. At times like that, those who weren't busy would grab some shut-eye while waiting on the company man to call us up for our turn. We were mostly housed on board a supply boat, which loitered nearby the platform. Since the platform was unmanned, there was only a basic accommodation cabin with bunk beds for 4. Although only 2 guys would sleep there, the product technician, and the crane operator. During normal times, when there wasn't a crew working on the platform, it would be completely unmanned. No one working or staying there full time except the odd maintenance crew, and usually only visiting during the day. The platform would be devoid of any human presence 95% of the time. The platform itself was old, maybe close to 30 years at this point. The only permanent human presence nearby was at this nearby oil tanker, repurposed as a floating production and storage facility anchored maybe 2 clicks out, where there was a full crew stationed. At any given time, day or night, you could see the tanker clearly, especially since there was a really tall burner. The flame could reach up to 50 feet at times, and things can get weird at uninhabited places like these. For starters, little things tend to grow legs and walk away. Stuff like hand tools would go missing, then be found in the oddest of places. At first we thought it was the other guys borrowing stuff without asking. Yeah, we do that all the time. Then we took to painting our respective stuff in company colors so we wouldn't mistake them. But it still happened, even though every man swore never to touch another crew's stuff without permission. We'd even find the missing things in strange places that no one would go to or were working at. Say in hidden corners placed on top of an overhead pipe. Big no-no. On the crane pedestal, you get the idea. Guys heard things. Voices around the corner, hammering sounds where no one was there. Still, we could still tell ourselves that maybe we heard wrong, or perhaps we were just imagining things, until physical contact started to be made. The platform was divided into 4 decks. The lowest was C deck, that was 15 feet above sea level, and where the smoking area and toilet, hole in the grating, was. The second, cellar deck, had a separator vessel, a cylindrical tank. The third was the production deck housing the wellhead, other process machinery, accommodation cabin and control room. The top was the main deck, where we rigged up all our heavy equipment for the job. Now off-duty crew would often hang out at the cellar desk as it was cool, shaded and relatively quiet. A perfect spot to take a nap was under the separator. It was also a favorite prayer spot for the Muslims, quiet enough to be undisturbed. Guys would sometimes be on their way down to the cellar or C deck for a break and catch a glimpse of someone standing or crouching in the far corner of the cellar door out of the corner of their eye, thinking it was one of the other guys, only later realizing that there was really no one there. A couple of lads said the figure appeared to be dressed in white and had long, flowing hair that obscured its features. A few other times, guys had spotted someone else also heading down the stairs to the cellar/C deck, only to find that there was no one there upon arrival, and there was only one staircase from the C deck to the cellar and up to the production deck. The first guys to experience physical contact were the 2 closest buddies of mine, Joe and Bob. They were on night shift and off duty, so went down to the cellar deck to catch a nap, expecting to be called up at 0300 hours. They lay down under the separator and closed their eyes. It was a slow night. Slick line was running in whole, and there were maybe all of 7 people on the platform that night. 4 working up on the main deck, 1 asleep in the cabin, Joe and Bob. Bob awoke to a horrible itching sensation across his whole face. Startled, he got up, and the feeling subsided quickly. Joe was snoring. Bob woke Joe up to ask if he felt the same thing too. The first thought in these men's minds were that there might have been a chemical or gas leak. Joe didn't feel a thing, and after a few minutes checking around, both of them went back to sleep. No sooner than sleep had taken a hold of them, when it was Joe's turn to feel that maddening itch across his whole face, and he got up to find now Bob was soundly asleep. Waking him up, both men decided that something was definitely wrong, and they quickly retreated back up to the main deck. It was a few days later When recounting the situation to me, I laughed and joked that maybe it was the now infamous cellar deck figure peering over them, and its hair dragging across their faces. The silent, stony stares of both these normally jovial guys suggested that my joke had perhaps hit too close to home. We had a senior guy everyone called Uncle Al. He was a good worker, strong, silent type, and he was on the night shift. He liked to head down to C deck alone to enjoy a cigarette and be alone with his thoughts. He never really let any of the goings-on bother him. He just quietly shrugged it off whenever someone said anything in hushed whispers. One particular night, Uncle Al headed down to the C deck alone as usual for his smoke. It was another quiet night and he was off duty, sitting on the bench, leaning against the rail and listening to the calm rhythm of the waves lapping against the platform in the moonlit night. Uncle Al was lost in his own thoughts. A strong grip closed around his wrist, jerking his hand backwards and over the railing. Cursing, he watched as his cigarette floated down to the sea. Must be a muscle spasm, he thought silently, fishing out another cigarette. He lit it, took a long drag and closed his eyes. Then, it grabbed him roughly by the shoulder, yanking him hard backwards and against the railing, as though to throw him bodily into the sea. This was no mere muscle spasm for sure. Wide-eyed, he cast his gaze about, but sure enough, he was all alone on the tiny sea deck. It was time to go. From that night onwards, Uncle Al never went downstairs alone. He'd always insist that someone accompany him for a smoke or toilet break, or else he'd just stay up on main deck. He didn't speak about his encounter for a while, but the drastic change in his behavior was enough to prompt someone to ask him what was going on. It was only then that we heard what happened to him. Suffice to say, we all had an unspoken rule to never be alone on the sea deck from then on, even during the day. The monsoon season was upon us. That time of year when there were heavy thunderstorms, very strong winds almost constantly, and you could liken it to a hurricane season in the Gulf. We were caught in the monsoon, stranded on the platform. Gale force winds and sheeting rain lashed at the platform almost constantly. We couldn't evacuate to the boat. It could not approach under such conditions, and we had no food. Our food supplies were brought up daily from the gallery on the boat. All we could do was wait. 15 men, only a tin of dry crackers to ration between us, and sleeping huddled up together for warmth on soggy cardboard laid upon metal grating. We couldn't shelter in the tiny cabin. There was only standing space for 10 men. Cellar deck was constantly being soaked by the rain whipping horizontally, and in C deck the waves were already crashing up through the grating. Half the time, you couldn't even see the grating beneath the waves. And so we waited for 3 days and nights. I can't say I envied the poor guys on the boats either. It was like being tossed around a child's toy in those 20-foot waves. The storm was so heavy, we could barely make out a faint glow in the direction of the SPSO, the massive flame from the flare boom not even penetrating the sheets of rain. Winds so strong, they could easily knock a man off his feet. And if he braved going outside, he'd quickly find himself drowned in the water after being blown off. The weather was relentless. I remember us praying for a little window, just a few hours worth so we could evacuate. And the wish was granted. The rains parted. The furious downpour slowly died down to a mere drizzle, but all around us the storm raged unabated, almost as if an invisible umbrella had opened up to shelter the platform from the storm. We still couldn't see the FPSO. The gale force winds still lashed at us. We thought at first that we were in the eye of the storm, but this was something else. I'd experienced being in the eye of the storm before, and it always passed quickly. No, it was like the storm itself had parted around us. The boat managed to swing by briefly for us to grab some much-needed boxes of dry provisions using a rope, That was all the captain could manage to do, but it was enough to keep us going for a little longer. All around, the storm continued to rage, but we stayed dry. The next day, as dawn broke, we watched as the storm passed, like a wall of water reaching up to the sky, passing by on all sides. And still, we were dry. At noon, the boat captain made another daring pass. This time, we just barely made it back on board with all hands. The last 3 guys to jump on the boat narrowly escaped being swept overboard by a freak wave that hit just after they had touched down on the boat's deck. But we were all safe now. We left the equipment behind. We would return once the monsoon season had passed and it was safe to do so. I watched from the deck as the boat pulled away and began to sail back to port, watching as the platform slowly receded into the distance, with that feeling that something or someone was watching us too. Back in 2015, I was living on Orcas Island, Washington, a stunning but isolated place in the Salish Sea, northwest of Seattle. In the heart of the island, hidden beneath a dense canopy of fir and cedar, lies Cascade Lake, a deep, glassy body of water that seems to swallow the sky when the sun dips below the trees. My friends and I had spent the summer jumping off cliffs, swimming in the bottomless depths and lounging on its shores, unaware of just how much we didn't know about the place. We were fooling around on the wooden bridge over the lake, the sun barely a sliver on the horizon. There was a little fish, aggressive and frantic, that kept swarming and nipping at us, like we were invading something we shouldn't. That's when my dog Duke did something to make my stomach turn. We had moved onto some rocks at the shoreline, but Duke had stayed back at the bridge. He saw where we'd gone and then just launched himself into the lake, churning the water so violently it almost looked like he was running across the surface. And this is a dog who hated getting wet, yet he was swimming as if something were chasing him, as if something were down there beneath him rising. When he finally pulled himself onto the rocks, he was shaking, not from cold, but from fear. A friend pointed out a strange, gnarled root ball sticking out further down the shoreline. He commented that it looked like a dragon head. I walked closer, stepping carefully along the uneven rocks, and sure enough, the way the roots twisted, it did look like a dragon, horns and a long snout, with deep grooves that could have been ancient eyes. I was about to turn away when I felt something. A primal, stomach-sinking sensation like something had just locked its gaze on me. I turned around. 5 feet from me, floating in the water, was a log that hadn't been there before. Only, it wasn't a log. It was alive. Its surface was slick, covered in dark moss that made it blend into the water. But as I stared, the illusion broke. Beneath the disguise, I saw a long, scaly snout, reptilian eyes, something like ears or fins pressed back against the skull, and it was studying me. For one horrifying moment, neither of us moved. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. Then Duke and Cookie saw it. They exploded into frantic barking, charging the water, their bodies tensed in pure terror. But the thing didn't flinch. It was still. I don't remember backing away. I just remember running, my dogs at my heels, breath tearing through my lungs. When we got back, it was gone. The next day, I asked an old friend from Bellingham if he'd ever heard of water dragons. As a joke, I thought it was just superstition. He didn't even hesitate. He said, dead serious, we had to tie up goats near the lake to keep them away. I laughed, and he didn't. Then I remembered something else. In the years before this happened, 2014, a man had been found dead near those same rocks, alone in his tent, covered in bite marks. The official explanation? Otters. There are no natural predators on Orcas Islands, no wolves, no bears, just the water, and what's beneath it. Months later, my then girlfriend, who had grown up on the island, told me something offhandedly. One day while driving past Cascade Lake, she saw it too. a long black shape gliding silently beneath the surface. There are rumors that these lakes connect to the sea through underground tunnels, and they're deep, deeper than anyone knows, and that sometimes something moves through them. I never swam in Cascade Lake again. A number of years ago, I participated in a cultural exchange, a school-sanctioned adventure across Europe, Moscow, and St. Petersburg. Then the travel agency offered us an extension, Tallinn, Estonia, and then across the Baltic Sea to Helsinki, Finland. How could we say no? We were teenagers loose in the world for the first time, and the idea of crossing a sea on a real ship felt unreal. The morning we boarded the ferry was cold and grey, typical European weather. The ship itself was massive. The morning we boarded the ferry was cold and grey. A group of girls had taken over a table in the dining area, just laughing, eating, and scrolling through their cameras. That's when he came. A middle-aged, gaunt-looking guy, grey at the temples, wearing a pale windbreaker zipped all the way up to his throat, despite the heat in the dining area. He approached their table and started speaking in rapid Russian, gesturing with his hands. The girls blinked, caught off guard, and said they didn't understand, only English. He smiled, nodded, and walked away. But he didn't go far. Minutes later he was back, not speaking this time, just sitting at the next table. His eyes didn't move. He stared unapologetically and unblinkingly, absorbing every detail like he was trying to memorize them. The girls felt uncomfortable, so they moved. Across the room, behind some fake plants. And he moved again, appearing at the next table. They tried to ignore him until Becca noticed the lens of the camera peeking out from under his coat. That was when they ran. They found a group of teachers and parents clustered around the coffee bar. Words tumbled out, but the adults understood enough. Our trip leader went off in search for a crew member, and the rest followed the girls back to their table, but the man had already gone. The girls laughed nervously. They stuck close to the adults, until Mary stood up, who needed to use the bathroom. She said she'd be quick, and another girl had just gone in, so it felt safe enough to do so. The corridor to the restroom was narrow and dimly lit, swaying slightly with the motion of the ship. She hurried along the hallway and then stopped. He was there again, standing halfway down the hall as if he'd been waiting. Mary didn't say a word. She rushed past him, trying to stay calm, heart thudding, lungs tight. She ducked into the bathroom and locked the door. Her breathing hitched, then turned to gasping. She was hyperventilating, crouched in a cold stall, unsure if he was right outside. What she didn't know is that one of the dads had quietly followed her, a gut feeling. He'd seen the man too. When he saw the man shadowing Mary, he didn't hesitate. He walked right past him, locked eyes, staring. The man looked startled for the first time. His eyes flickered down. He turned and walked quickly away, swallowed by the hallway. Mr. Jensen stood outside the bathroom like a statue, and when he was sure the man was gone, he knocked gently and told Mary it was safe. By then, Mr. Powell had returned with a ferry employee who spoke English. He listened to the story, nodding with a grim expression, and they agreed to talk to the man, but we never saw him again. It's crazy to think how creeps like this try and prey on young, innocent girls in a vulnerable place like the middle of the ocean. About 15 years ago, we were transiting through the Malacca Strait near Indonesia, an area that is notorious for piracy. We were fully prepped. Fire hoses rolled out and pressurized, doors locked, everyone briefed and alert. The tension on board was thick, like everyone could sense something was coming. We were all ready for it. And then, a panicked voice cut through the emergency radio channel. A nearby ship was about 5 miles behind us and under threat. We pulled up to their position on the ECDIS and trained our binoculars towards them. I'll never forget what I witnessed. 3 small speedboats were closing in. 1 boat stayed further back, possibly coordinating or watching. The other two charged in. The ship being attacked was spraying water in every direction with their hose, trying to keep the pirates off. But it didn't matter. Bullets started flying. You could see the flashes of automatic gunfire from the boats hitting the hull, then the boarding. The radio crackled again with a few more desperate transmissions, then silence. And a few minutes later, we saw the ship change course. To this day, we have no idea what happened. We never heard any follow-up or saw it in the news. It felt like something like that just disappeared into the ocean. I'm pretty sure it was stolen, and I fear that everyone aboard was probably murdered. On another occasion, while I was in Southeast Asia, we got caught in a monsoon so intense you couldn't breathe. I'm not exaggerating. Rain was so dense it felt like trying to inhale underwater. Visibility dropped to nothing, and for a few surreal minutes we were just floating blind in a wall of water. You couldn't see the bow of the ship from the bridge, just grey. That was the only time I actually felt the weight of weather. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, once, in the Indian Ocean, we were surrounded by hundreds of whales. I'm talking everywhere you looked, tails, spouts, breaching. They weren't scared of us. It's like they had invited us to their world for a little while. We slowed down and just drifted along with them. Hours passed, and it was the most peaceful moment of my life. Sailing can show you the best and worst of the world, sometimes all in the same trip. This story takes place back in 2013. This all happened in Mastic Beach, which is in Long Island, New York. Mastic was extremely far from safe. One day in August I went to Mastic Beach. Now this beach is extremely filthy and has rarely ever been cleaned. It was the closest beach from where we lived. I couldn't go to a beach further because the other closest beach was about a 35-minute drive away, and I had a learner's permit at the time. I really wasn't supposed to be driving alone, but the beach was only 5 minutes away and there were no police in the area. I arrived at the beach. I saw there were no cars in sight, so I took a chair, towel and handbag out of my car and placed it in the sand. After placing these items down, I walked my way over to the water and put my feet in it. I walked further into the water, and now my knees were in it. I thought about swimming for a second, but I saw the water was murky and had algae in it. So what I did was that I walked out of the water and back to shore. I got on my chair and dried myself off with a towel. I wasn't planning on leaving anytime soon, because it was hot out, and it was very sunny. Instead of going back in the water, I decided I wanted to walk along the long beach area. So I proceeded. About 10 minutes into my walk, it started to smell. At first, I figured it was just some trash laying around near me or a dead fish. As I continued to walk forward, the smell kept getting stronger. The whole time walking, I didn't look in any other direction but in front. As I was still walking, looking at only 12 o'clock, I felt my foot hit something hard and hairy. I looked down, and what I saw was the kind of things you read in horror stories. Right below me was the lifeless head of an old woman. Her eyes and mouth were open wider than humanly possible. I saw this and I screamed like a little girl and ran so fast like I was on steroids. When I got back to my chair, I threw up immediately from running so fast, from the gut-wrenching sight that I saw. I got my phone from my bag and called the police, then connected to a 911 dispatcher and told her everything she had to know. She then told me to stay put, as the police would be on their way. When the police arrived, I told them where the dead body was. They thanked me and told me to go home because they were going to shut down the beach as it was under investigation. I would say an estimate of 3 weeks had passed when one morning I turned on the news, like I would do every morning, and I saw that the dead woman had finally been identified. Her name was Diane Ross. She was 63. It was also revealed that the cause of her death was murder and she was stabbed in the back of her neck. I was in disbelief. They were never able to trace any DNA prints to who killed her, and the killer had never been caught, which is the scariest part of this. As of today, I never went back to that beach and never will. I also moved to a different and more wealthy town in Long Island that is far safer, where the crime rate is very low. And although this was 11 years ago, it still feels like yesterday, as time flies by fast. This is my mother's story. I've done my best to adapt her words, though even now, my father refuses to talk about it. He gets visibly uncomfortable if anyone brings it up, his expression tightening, his hands gripping whatever's in front of him, like he's bracing for something to return. It happened around 20 years ago. My parents had taken a trip to a tropical beach town, staying at a modest hotel with a small camping area out back. That night the beach wasn't empty. People were scattered along the sand, silhouettes faint in the dim light, talking in low voices, some laughing, some just staring at the sea. My parents sat together, feeling the warm sand beneath them, breathing in the heavy night air. And then it arrived. At first they didn't notice. It had been standing near the water, barely distinguishable from the shadows, but it moved in a way that was wrong. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, and wrapped in a long black overcoat that billowed slightly. Despite the absence of wind, the way it walked wasn't smooth. It was stiff and mechanical, as if it wasn't used to the motion. It didn't shuffle through the sand, it glided. My mother nudged my father and they both fell silent, watching it as it approached. It stopped abruptly, as if freezing in place, mere meters away. At that distance they could make out even more details, or rather, lack thereof. The overcoat's collar was high, nearly covering its face. What little was visible was pale and smooth, too smooth, lacking the imperfections of human skin. There were no defining features, no nose, no mouth, just two deep-set black eyes. And then it turned its head. Not gradually like a person would, it snapped to the side, its gaze locking onto them with unnatural precision, as though it had just noticed they were watching. My mother felt something tighten in her chest. It was looking at them but not seeing them, not like a person would. It felt like it was reading them, dissecting them. She wanted to speak, to ask who it was, what it was doing there. But before she could, it turned away and slid forwards. Not walked, not ran, slid. The thing didn't seem to touch the ground. It moved with an eerie, fluid speed, gliding towards the water without a single misstep. The coat swayed, but they still couldn't see its feet, if it even had any. And then the same unnatural smoothness. It reached the water's edge and kept going. It didn't wade in, it didn't sink. It floated over the waves, picking up speed, vanishing into the blackness of the ocean. My father, a staunch atheist and skeptic, sat frozen beside my mother. Then something in him snapped. Without thinking, he bolted up and ran after it. My mother shouted for him to stop, panic rising in her throat. She watched as he sprinted towards the shore, chasing after the impossible as if trying to force it to be something real, something rational. But by the time he reached the water, it was gone. He stood there panting, staring into the endless dark. He stayed like that for a long time, fists clenched, shoulders heaving as if waiting for something to come back. Eventually he turned around and walked back, his face ashen, his lips pressed into a tight, colorless line. He never spoke of it again. My mother's looked at the others on the beach, expecting them to be just as shaken. But no one else seemed to notice. The conversations continued, the laughter, the idle chatter. It was as if the thing had only wanted them to see it. And they did. But they never should have. It's been many years now, and for context, a cenote is a sinkhole where people can go swimming. We went as a group of friends, and honestly everything seemed normal at first. The cenote was beautiful, like something out of a travel magazine. The water was crystal clear, and the sunlight filtered through the trees, making the surface sparkle. I couldn't really swim, so I decided to sit on this large rock near the edge of the water. It was warm and a little rough, but it felt safe. One of my friends sat next to me since she wasn't much of a swimmer either. We just hung out there chatting and watching the others have fun in the water. At first, I thought I felt something touch my foot. It wasn't soft, but it wasn't rough either. I yanked my leg back immediately and looked around, but the water was calm with no sign of anything. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I imagined it, or a fish brushed by. A few minutes later, my friend screamed. I turned just in time to see her sliding off the rock into the water. She grabbed me as she went down, instinctively clutching my arm for dear life, and that's when I felt it. Something was pulling both of us down. I swear there were hands, not one but several of them, tugging at our legs and dragging us towards the center of the cenote. I couldn't see what was happening, but I could feel it, sharp bony fingers gripping and pulling. The water suddenly felt deeper, darker and colder. I couldn't breathe, neither could she. She was thrashing and I was trying to hold on to her while figuring out how to get my head above water, but it was like something was sucking us down into a whirlpool, and I thought I was going to pass out. Finally, our friend noticed and rushed over, and I remember feeling them grab me, but it wasn't easy. They were struggling to pull us up. They later told me they felt it too. Something was fighting back, pulling us the other way. Somehow, they got us out. My friend was spluttering and barely conscious, and I was shaking so hard I could barely speak. I felt like my lungs were on fire. Then I sat on the edge of the cenote, soaking wet and scared out of my mind, while they just tried to make sense of what had happened. Even now, some 14 years later, I still don't know what to make of it. Some people say the cenotes are mystical, and they're connected to something bigger or darker. I don't know if that's true, but I'm definitely never going near one again, and never went swimming after that. It was a blistering summer afternoon in the early 2000s, the kind where the heat shimmered off the pavement and the air smelt like sunscreen and salt. We were at the beach. It was packed. Colorful towels, dripping ice cream cones, and kids screaming. My 6-year-old cousin and me at 10 were on the shoreline, kneeling in wet sand, sculpting a sandcastle. The tide licked our feet, the water warm and familiar. Our parents sat a short distance away, sunbathing and chatting, trusting that we were safe as we were still in sight. Or at least that's what we thought. I don't remember seeing the couple walk up. One second it was just me and my cousin, and the next they were there. A man and young woman, maybe in their early 20s. They knelt down beside us. The man had shaggy brown hair, long jeans that would darken at the hems from seawater, and the woman had sunglasses so big I couldn't even see her eyes. But she smiled an awful lot. "Wow, what a cool sandcastle," the man said in a smooth voice. "Did you guys make this by yourselves?" My cousin nodded excitedly. I stared. Something about them made my stomach turn. Their clothes were mostly dry. Their skin wasn't sunburnt or sandy like everyone else's. They didn't have towels or beach bags or anything there that said they were here to swim. They weren't here for the beach. They were clearly there for some other reason. Then the woman crouched lower. "You guys are about the same age as our kids. A boy just like you, 10? And a little girl like you, 6. We hadn't told them our ages. A wave crashed beside us, and even though we were surrounded by hundreds of people, it felt like we were alone. "You should come with us." It wasn't a question. I went rigid. My cousin obviously just kept packing wet sand into a mold, but I knew I had to run. I swallowed hard and said, "I'll be right back." And then I turned and ran, until I reached my parents. When I told them what happened, my aunt's face changed, and she took off running towards the water where my cousin was. When she got there, the couple were gone, vanished. Just my cousin still playing by the castle, patting the walls in place, completely unaware of how close she had been to disappearing forever. I know I shouldn't have left her alone. I know I should have grabbed her hand and pulled her with me, but I was 10. and I thought she was still safe. I'm 32 now, and sometimes I wonder what would have happened to me if I'd have agreed to go with them. Would we have ever been seen again, or even been here at all? I'm not a sailor myself, but one of my closest friends works as a tech on a merchant vessel. He's been all over the Caribbean, Africa, Southeast Asia, Indian Ocean. Some of the stuff he's seen, it's hard to even process. Here's one that stuck with me for years. They were sailing near Haiti when someone spotted a strange shape on the horizon. At first they thought it was just floating trash, which sadly isn't rare in that area. But as they got closer it became obvious that it wasn't trash. It was a raft, and I use that word very loosely. This thing was literally held together with soda bottles, scraps of plastic, styrofoam, bits of wood, and spray foam insulation. Just random garbage tied together with what looked like fishing line and strips of cloth. Floating on top were several people, migrants barely conscious, sun-scorched, eyes crusted shut with salt, no motor, no paddle, no water, no shade. They were drifting, days away from any help. My friend said they immediately launched the man overboard boat, brought them aboard, gave them water, food, and medical attention while waiting for the Coast Guard's instructions. He told me that one of the guys didn't speak, didn't even cry, just laid on the deck of the ship and kissed the metal floor. But here's the part that really haunted me. He said under those same waters, the ocean floor is scattered with bodies. Around Haiti, around the Windward Passage, and even outside major US ports like Miami and Tampa. He called them ghost routes, places where homemade rafts and overloaded boats capsize or just vanish, and people on them don't make it. No headlines, no rescues at all. The current just pulls them down. Sometimes they wash up, but often they just disappear. He'd seen it with his own eyes. Partial skeletal remains caught in reef beds, bits of life jackets stuck in corals, shoes with no feet in them. And it's not just Haiti. He said in the Florida Straits and the Gulf, especially during high migration waves, they'd sometimes pass rafts that were already empty, half sunk and abandoned, floating like tombstones. He told me that most people think the ocean is just water and fish, but sometimes when the light hits just right, you can see it's where many unfortunate souls meet their final resting place, and I never looked at the sea the same way since. For the past 2.5 years now, I have been living in the north of the Scottish Highlands, and when I say north, I mean as far north as you can possibly go. I live in a region called Caithness, in the small coastal town of Thurso, which is actually the northmost town on the British mainland. I had always wanted to live in the Scottish Highlands, which seemed a far cry from my gloomy hometown in Yorkshire, and when my dad and his partner told me they'd bought an old house up there, I jumped at the opportunity. From what they told me, Caithness sounded like the perfect destination. There were seals and otters in the town's river, dolphins and orcas in the seas, and at certain times of the year you could see the northern lights in the sky. But despite my initial excitement of finally getting to live there, full of beautiful mountains, amazing wildlife and vibrant culture, I would soon learn the region I had just moved to was far from the idyllic destination I had dreamed of. So many tourists flood here each summer, but when you actually choose to live here, in a harsh and freezing coastal climate, the place feels more like purgatory. More than that, it can feel cursed. This probably just sounds like superstition on my part, but what almost convinces me of this belief, more so than anything else, is that disturbing things have washed up on shore, each one supposedly worse than the last, and they all have to do with death. The first thing I discovered here happened to be a couple of months after I first moved here. In my spare time, I took to exploring the coastline around the area. It was on one of these days that I started to explore what was east of Thurso. On the right-hand side, on the mouth of the river, there's an old ruin of a castle, but past that leads to a cliff trail around the eastern coastline. I first started exploring this trail with my dog Maisie on a very windy, rainy day. We trekked down the cliff trail and onto the bedrocks by the sea, and making our way around the curve of a cliff base when we found something. Littered all over the bedrock floor were what seemed like dozens of dead seabirds. They were everywhere. It was as though they had just fallen out of the sky and washed ashore. I assumed they'd either crashed into the rocks or were swept into the sea due to the stormy weather. Feeling like this was almost a warning, I decided to make my way back home rather than risk being blown off the cliff trail. It wasn't until a day or so after, when I went back there to explore further down the coast, that a woman with her young daughter stopped me, shouting across the other side of the road through the heavy rain. The woman told me she'd just come from that direction, but there was a warning sign for dog walkers, warning them the area was infested with dead seabirds that had died from bird flu. She said the warning had told dog walkers to keep their dogs on a leash at all times, as bird flu was contagious to them. This instantly concerned me, as the day before my dog Maisie had gotten close to the dead seabirds to sniff them. But there was something else. Something about meeting this woman had struck me as odd. Although she was just a normal woman with her young daughter, they were walking a dog that was completely identical to Maisie. A small black and white border collie. Maybe that's why the woman was so adamant to warn me, because in my dog she saw her own heading in the direction of danger. But why this detail was so strange to me was because it almost felt like an omen. She was leading her dog identical to mine away from the contagious dead birds, as though I should have done the same. I almost felt as though it wasn't just the woman who warned me, but something else disguised as a coincidence. Curious as to what this warning sign was, I thanked the woman for letting me know before continuing with Maisie towards the trail. We reached the entrance of the castle ruins, and on the entrance gate, I saw the sign she had warned me about. It was in bright yellow and outlined with contagion symbols. If the woman's warning wasn't enough to make me turn around, that definitely was, and so I headed back into town, all the while worrying that my dog might now be contagious. But thankfully Maisie was absolutely fine. Although I would later learn that bird flu was common to the region, and so dead seabirds weren't anything new. What I would stumble upon a year later, washed up on the town's beach, would be far more sinister. In the summer of the following year, like most days, I walked with Maisie along the town's beach, which stretched from one end of Thurso Bay to the other. I never really liked this beach. It was always covered in stacks of seaweed, which not only stunk but attracted swarms of flies and midges. Even if they weren't on you, you couldn't help but feel like you were being bitten all over your body. The one thing I did love about this beach was that on a clear enough day, you could see in the distance one of the islands of Orkney. On a more cloudy or foggy day, it was as if this particular island was never there to begin with, and all you could see is the ocean and a false horizon. On a particular summer's day, I was walking along with Maisie along the beach. I had let her off her lead as she loved exploring and finding new smells from the ocean. She was rummaging through the stacks of seaweed when suddenly Maisie found something. I went to see what it was, and I realized it was something I'd never seen before. What we found lying on top of a layer of seaweed was an animal skeleton. I wasn't sure what animal it belonged to exactly, but it was either a sheep or a goat. There were many farmlands in the area. My best guess was an animal of the Orkney coastland must have fallen off a ledge or drowned, and its remains eventually washed up here. Although I was initially taken aback, something about it quickly caught my eye. The upper body was indeed skeletal remains, completely picked clean, but the lower body was still there. It still had its hoofs and its wet fur. The fur was dark grey, and as far as I could see, all the meat underneath was intact. Although disturbed by this carcass, I was also confused. I didn't understand was how the upper body of the animal had been completely picked off, whereas the lower part hadn't even been touched. What's weird is the body didn't even look that old. It still looked very fresh. I can still recollect the image of this dead animal in my mind's eye. At the time, one of the first impressions I had with it was that it seemed almost satanic. It reminded me of the image of Baphomet, a goat's head on a man's body. The skeleton also felt like an omen, a bad one. I thought it might have been at the time, and shortly after, my life suddenly took on a very dark and somewhat tragic downward spiral. While I still lived in this godforsaken place, I have come across one more thing that washed ashore. 6 months or so later, I was still recovering from the personal thing that happened to me, almost foreshadowed by the skeleton. It was also around this time I'd just gotten out of a long-distance relationship and was only now finding closure from it. Feeling as though I had finally gotten over it, I decided I wanted to go on a long hike by myself along the cliff trail east of Thurso. And so, the day after Christmas Day, I got my backpack together, packed a lunch for myself, and headed out at 6 a.m. The hike along the trail had taken me all day, and by the evening, I had walked so far that I actually discovered what I first thought was a ghost town. What I found was an abandoned port settlement, which had the creepiest looking disperse of old stone houses, as well as what looked like the ruins of an ancient round tower. As it turns out, this is actually the Castletown Heritage Centre, a tourist spot. I seem to have walked so far around the rugged terrain that I was now 10 miles outside of Thurso, on the other side of this settlement, where the distant cliffs of Dunnet Bay, which, compared to the cliffs I had already trekked along, were far grander. Although I could feel my legs finally begin to give way, and was already anticipating a long journey back along the trail, I decided I was going to cross the bay and reach the cliffs, and then make my way back home, considering what I would find there. This is the point in the journey where I should have stopped. By the time I was making my way around the bay, it had become very dark. I had already walked past more than half of the bay, but the cliffs didn't feel any closer. It was at this point when I decided I really needed to turn around, as walking back along the cliff trail at night was going to be dangerous. And for the parts of the trail that led down to the base of the cliffs, I really couldn't afford for the tide to cut off my route. I made my way back through the abandoned settlement of the Heritage Centre, and at night this settlement definitely felt more like a ghost town. Shining my phone flashlight in the windows of the old stone houses, I was expecting to see a face or something peer out at me. What surprisingly made these houses scarier at night was a handful of old fishing boats that had been left outside of them. But what was more concerning is that in this abandoned ghost town of a settlement, I wasn't alone. A van had pulled up, with 3 or 4 young men getting out of it. I wasn't sure what they were doing exactly, but they were burning things in a trash can. What they were burning I didn't know, but as I made my way out of the abandoned settlement, every time I looked back at the men by the van, at least one of them was watching me. Finally, making my way back, I tried retracing my own footprints along the beach. It was so dark by now that I needed to use my phone flashlight to find them. As I wandered through the darkness with only the dim brightness of the flashlight to guide me, I came across something ahead of me. I could see a dark silhouette of something in the sand. It was too far away for my flashlight to reach, but it seemed to me that it was just a big rock, so I wasn't too concerned. But for some reason, I wasn't 100% convinced either. The more I think it could be something else. I was right on top of it now, and the silhouette didn't look as much like a rock as I thought it did. If anything, it looked more like a very big fish, almost like a tuna fish. I didn't even realize fish could get that big in and around these waters. Still unsure whether this was just a rock or a dead fish of sorts, I was too afraid to shine my light on it. I was deciding to go and touch it with my foot. At first, I thought I was going to feel a hard rock beneath me, only to realize the darkness had tricked me, and it was squidgy. Then I shined my flashlight down, for it to reveal a dead seal pup. Seal carcasses do occasionally wash up in the region, and it wasn't even the first time I'd seen one. But as I studied this dead seal with my flashlight, feeling my own skin crawl, I suddenly noticed something alarming. The seal pup had a chunk of flesh bitten out of it. For all I know, it could have been hit by a boat, and that's what caused the wound. But the wound was round, and basically, a perfect bite shape. The most shocking thing, though, was that it was missing its head. I quickly retracted my foot and kept on walking, and in the glow of my flashlight, I saw another dead seal pup. And when I looked closer to investigate, it too had a bite mark from it and was missing its skull. That was really creepy. I made it home, quick smart. Seeing this felt like another omen. For the past 2.5 years I've been here, I almost do feel as though the region is cursed, not because of what I found washed ashore, after all, dead things wash up here all the time, but for other reasons. Despite the natural beauty all around, it does feel somewhat like a purgatory, a depressive place that attracts lost souls from around the UK. Many of the locals leave this place, migrating far down south to places like Glasgow. On the contrary, it seems a fair number of people like me have come from afar to live here, mostly retired English couples who, for some reason, chose this place above all others to live comfortably before the day they die. Perhaps like me, they thought this place would be idyllic, only to find out they were wrong. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you have enjoyed tonight's collection of scary stories from deep water. If of course you did, you can let me know down below. Your thoughts and comments are always appreciated. And if you would like a little bit more Mort, some exclusive perks, you can follow the link in the description to find out more. That's it from me though. I wish you all a great night, and a thank you as always to my members and patrons whose names can't be seen on screen now. Stay awesome guys, and I'll see you in the next one.